Alright, what's going on, guys? So I had a couple of requests for a missile tutorial, basically like, I don't know, everything to do with the missiles and how you classify them via Fox 1, Fox 2, Fox 3, right? So we're going to go ahead and talk about that today. What I'm going to do is just go over what Fox 1, Fox 2, Fox 3 is, and then we can talk a little bit about specifics of certain missiles. And then hopefully by the end of this tutorial, you'll be able to distinguish what missile is what kind of Fox based on the information that you got here. You'll be able to just look that missile up yourself and be able to say which Fox it is. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. The first thing we got is Fox 1, Fox 2, Fox 3. The one thing I want to talk about before we get started is the rifle. Rifle is the designation given to air-to-ground missiles, such as the Maverick. Technically, the Maverick is a missile, but because it's not an air-to-air missile, it's not classified as a Fox. Okay, so I just wanted to put it in this video just to say that only air-to-air missiles are classified as Foxes. Okay. So if you were ever to fire a Maverick at a tank or something, you would call rifle. You wouldn't call Fox. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started with the Foxes. Fox 1 is going to be semi-active radar homing. Semi-active means that the missile actually requires information from the plane's radar in order to hit its target. We'll talk about examples of this as we go through it. And we'll review this at the end as well. It'll make more sense. But for now, just know that Fox 1 is a semi-active and that it requires information from the plane. Okay. Fox 2 is infrared homing, which can be also called a heat seeker. Okay, so missiles that are firing, that are requiring infrared homing are heat-seeking missiles. They're generally shorter range, as you can't really find a heat source at 100 kilometers away. Right, the missile's not going to be able to do that. So these are generally shorter range missiles, and their designation is Fox 2. Okay, Fox 3 missiles are a little more interesting and are definitely the most advanced version of these Foxes. Fox 3 missiles have their own onboard radar systems or some sort of mechanism on there that allows them to guide themselves to the target via their onboard electronics or radar or whatever it is they have in the missile. Okay, these missiles are, again, because they're radar homing, they can go farther distances, and they're generally smarter missiles. They don't require the plane to give them any kind of information to hit their target. Some missiles may still opt to do that. As long as the plane is able to maintain a lock, they will opt to continue get information from the plane. But if for whatever reason the plane loses lock on that target, the missile can just take over from there. Okay, and those missiles are designated Fox 3. Alright, so let's just go have a quick look at a graphic that explains these three. Okay, so here we are in our Fox 1, Fox 2, Fox 3 graphic here. Let's start with Fox 1, semi-active radar homing. These kind of missiles, again, so the green beam represents the radar, and you can see that the plane is the one putting out the radar. The missile is tracking to the target, requiring information from the plane's radar. Okay, so if this plane in Fox 1 semi-active radar, if this plane loses lock on the target, this missile goes stupid. It won't know what to do. Okay, so this is Fox 1. Fox 2, infrared homing. These are the heat-seeking missiles. As you can see, it's tracking. It's looking for the heat signature of the plane that it's tracking, generally looking for engines. We can talk a little about countermeasures here too. I guess for semi-active radar homing, because it's a radar, you would be dropping chaff, and the chaff would be confusing the radar and possibly making this missile go stupid. And infrared homing, as we talked about, the missile is tracking the heat signature. This plane would be dropping flares, which are burning hot pieces of magnesium that would also confuse the missile because it wouldn't know what heat source it was looking for. Okay, so that's an option for the infrared homing. Again, those are designated Fox 2. And Fox 3, active radar homing. These are The missiles that don't require any kind of information from the plane, they have their own onboard radar, as we can see here in the green represented, and they are tracking the target itself based on the profile of the airplane. And the countermeasure defense for these missiles, just like the Fox 1s, because they're radar guided, is just chaffs. They're not really looking for heat signatures. Okay, so this is a little graphic of what Fox 1, Fox 2, Fox 3 looks like. Okay, now we'll go talk about specific missiles, and you'll be able to see which one is which kind of Fox. Okay, all right, guys. So we're going to start with a personal favorite of mine, the AIM-54 Phoenix. A little bit of a history lesson here for you. The Phoenix was primarily designed to be launched from the F-14. I'm pretty sure that's the only platform that can fire it. It was used by the United States Navy, and it was also sold to the Iranian Air Force when they purchased the F-14. Okay. This missile is an absolute beast with a warhead of 135 pounds of high explosives. This 135 high explosive, this thing was so powerful that it decimated airplanes. Like when it hit a plane, the plane didn't just like crash to the ground. It like disintegrated. Okay. I'm going to use a couple of examples from the Iranian Air Force because they were the ones who really used the Phoenix. From what I know on record, the Americans have 3 or 4 launches from the Phoenixes, and they were unsuccessful in getting a kill with them, mostly because they were used as a deterrent by the U.S. Navy. Just having one of these things fired at you scared the living crap out of any plane. They just did a 180 and got the hell out of there. So as far as I know, the Americans do not have a kill recorded with the Phoenix missile. However, the Iranians do. The Iranians used it during the Iran-Iraq War for almost 8 years, and they decimated the Iraqi Air Force with this thing. Something like 70 confirmed kills on everything from MiGs to Mirages to Super Ententars and so on. Like this missile was just an absolute beast. And the warhead, the 135-pound warhead, the Iranians actually have a couple of examples where they say that one missile took out up to 3 MiGs, 2 to 3 MiGs, flying in close formation. So they hit the first plane, the leader, the wing leader, and he exploded. And the explosion was so large that it took out his wingman and his other wingman, based on either the explosion or the shards of his plane going flying into their engines. But the point is, the explosion was so powerful it disintegrated an entire flight of MiGs flying in close formation. Okay, so that'll give you a little bit of perspective on exactly how large the explosive yield on this missile was. The detonation mechanism was a proximity fuse. So a lot of these missiles have proximity fuses for detonation. Simply getting close enough to the enemy plane is good enough for it to explode. It doesn't have to like hit it or anything like that. There are missiles that require an impact, like their impact fuses, but even those ones, the ones with the impact fuses, they come along with a proximity fuse. So it's just a nice way of, I don't know, ensuring that if the missile misses the target by like a meter, it still explodes, right? Because within a meter, you're still going to do some serious damage. So they come with a proximity fuse. The operational range on the AIM-54 Phoenix was 100 nautical miles or 190 kilometers, which is just absurd, right? This is just crazy. That's a huge operational range. So obviously, for this reason, the AIM-54 Phoenix has had this massive propellant in the back. It was the missile had a very strong rocket propellant in the back, and due to the configuration of the way it's set up in the F-14, you can see there's missiles that are there's missiles that are actually in front of other missiles. So in order for the Phoenix to launch with this very strong propellant without damaging the plane or lighting other missiles on fire, was actually for the plane to drop the missile. Okay, so it would drop it like a bomb, and then the missile would turn on and go. So this was the way that they bypassed this configuration problem and the fact that the propellant was just so strong, right? So that's a little history lesson on the Phoenix here. Let's talk about the guidance system. Actually, sorry, the speed here. You get Mach 5 speed, so absolutely crazy Machs for the Phoenix, a very fast missile. The guidance system is the semi-active radar homing or terminal phase active radar homing. So it uses two guidance systems. Okay. Now, if you remember when we talked about the Foxes, the semi-active radar homing technically meant that the missile required information from the plane to hit its target. Okay. And terminal phase active radar homing means that in the final stages before impact, so terminal, the radar has the ability to go active radar homing, which, if you remember, was technically Fox 3. Okay, so the missile will be fired initially over the 190 kilometers. Let's pretend you're actually firing at 190. You obviously wouldn't. You would want to fire at a shorter range than that, but let's just pretend you are. It would go 180 kilometers using semi-active radar, so the plane would have to guide it all the way. And then for the last 9 to 11 miles or kilometers, it would, I believe it's miles. So the last 9 or 11 miles, the missile would stop its link with the plane and it would switch to terminal phase active radar homing, which means it would use its own onboard radars on the missile to track to the target. Okay? So that's the AIM-54 Phoenix. Now, why am I talking about this? Technically, we don't have any planes in DCS that can use the Phoenix as of right now, but we will soon when they drop the F-14, which is a highly anticipated plane right now. So when they bring that in, you'll have the AIM-54 Phoenix. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, so our next one is the very popular AIM-9 Sidewinder. It was used by NATO and again by Iran. What I'm going to do with this this used by section is give you, obviously, whoever is using it, NATO, and then any other adversary countries to NATO that are using these missiles. Okay, so all NATO countries, any country that's in any way allied to the United States, most definitely has Sidewinders. Iran acquired Sidewinders through the purchase of the F-4 Phantoms, the F-5 Tigers, and the F-14 Tomcats. Although I believe the version of the Sidewinder that they received is most likely out of date by now and is therefore useless or, very limited in its operational capacity. So NATO has them and Iran has them. The warhead that it's using is an angular blast frag, which most people think a missile just goes close to a target and just explodes, right? And it's the explosion that destroys the plane. They actually have different mechanisms. Like even the Phoenix, it was a blast fragmentation round, right? So it's basically a giant shotgun that explodes beside the plane, and these shards, maybe even a grenade is a better example, and these shards of metals and shrapnel go into the plane, and that's what causes the plane to actually crash. With the Sidewinder, is using an angular blast frag, which is, from what I understand about it, there's like metal rods inside the missile that expand and either hit the plane or, in some versions of the Sidewinder, actually aim to cut the plane in half. Okay, so the Sidewinder is one hell of a missile. Let's talk about the detonation mechanism. It's using an IR proximity fuse. So IR was infrared, so heat signature. Once it gets close enough to the heat signature, it has a proximity fuse that will detonate the missile. The operational range of the Sidewinder is 22 miles or 35.4 kilometers. That seems like very high range for a Sidewinder. You obviously would not be firing a Sidewinder at this range, 35.4. You're asking for an awful lot if you do fire it at 35 kilometers. You want to generally keep it for closer range engagements. The better it can see, the closer the heat source is to the missile, the higher the probability of that missile tracking to that target. So you got to be careful about where you fire it. The speed is Mach 2.5, which is much slower than what we've been seeing. All these short-range missiles generally go around Mach 2.5. And the guidance system is infrared homing, so it's looking for a heat signature. And if you remember when we talked about the Foxes, infrared homing is classified as Fox 2. Okay, so firing a Sidewinder, you would call out Fox 2. All right, what else do we want to talk about? The Sidewinder was actually like the first missile variant that was ever developed. And I read this little story. It was pretty cool. It was saying that the way the Russians got this missile was that during the Korea War, it was launched at a MiG-17, I believe, and it hit it. However, for whatever reason, it didn't detonate. So it got lodged into the back of this MiG-17, and this guy managed to somehow get home. He landed on the runway, and it was in China, obviously. So the Chinese then took this plane, they removed the missile, and they shipped it off to Russia, who then reverse engineered this missile into whatever version. I believe it was like something like K-13 they called it, and it was the early Russian variant of the Sidewinder. Okay, so that's how that happened. Okay, so now we have the AIM-7 Sparrow. The AIM-7 Sparrow has a very controversial history. Depending on who you talk to, it's either a really good missile or an absolutely piece of garbage. The reason I say that is because back in Vietnam, their probability of kill was close to 20%. They were absolutely garbage. And as the war went on, they improved them, and right up to Desert Storm, they actually got the probability of kill for an AIM-7 Sparrow up to something like 80%. So that's pretty good. So like I say, depending on who you talk to, you'll get a different opinion on what the AIM-7 Sparrow is. It was used by NATO and again by Iran. Once again, it was purchased through the purchase of the the F4 Phantoms, the F5 Tigers, and the Tomcat. So Iran also has them. Warhead, 88 pounds, 40 kilograms, high explosive blast fragmentation. So much larger warhead than the Sidewinder, and still nowhere near what the Phoenix is packing, right, at 132 pounds of high explosives. The AIM-7 is only 88 pounds. So you can see exactly how much overkill that Phoenix missile really was. Warhead, 88 pounds, detonation mechanism, proximity fuse, so just like everything else, if it gets close enough to its target, it'll explode. Operational range of 11 kilometers to 70 kilometers based on which variant of the missile you have. So the AIM-7C is only ranging about 11 kilometers, whereas the AIM-7 FMP variants are going right up to 70 kilometers. Mach speeds ranging from 2.5 to 4, and again that's AIM-7C going 2.5, and the AIM-7 FMP variants going up to Mach 4. Guidance system, semi-active radar, which, as we talked about, means that the missile requires information from the plane all the way to the target. Okay, from missile launch to impact, it requires radar information from the plane. Semi-active radar, which is designated Fox 1. Okay, so if you fire an AIM-7 Sparrow, you are designating Fox 1. Okay, so now we have the AIM-120 Amraam used by NATO. No adversary countries have access to it. The Amraam was built primarily to replace the Phoenix, which was a very heavy missile. As we talked about, it had high propellant and very high explosive yields. It was a very large missile, and it was difficult for planes to carry many of them, right? So like an F-18 or an F-15 or something like that wouldn't have been able to haul these things, and wouldn't have been able to haul enough of them, we can say. So the Americans set out to build a long-range missile that was a little smaller and a little more realistic to be mounted onto F-16s and F-18s and F-15s, and thus developed the AIM-120 Amraam, which is a smaller, sleeker missile carrying a smaller warhead, only 50 pounds of high explosive blast fragmentation. So just like the other ones, it explodes beside a plane, and shards of shrapnel and all that stuff go flying into that plane. Detonation mechanism, active radar target detection. So difference from the other ones is it's not using a proximity fuse. It's using a radar target detection. So the radar is telling the missile that you are now close enough, explode now. Okay, so that's the detonation mechanism of the AIM-120. Operational ranges, you have different variants of the AIM-120. You got the A and B, and you got the AIM-120C. The AIM-120 A and Bs are ranging 55 to 75 kilometers, and the AIM-120Cs are ranging about 105 kilometers. These missiles are reaching speeds of about Mach 4, and the guidance system is terminal active radar homing, which means that just like the Phoenix missile, it's requiring guidance all the way to the target, and then in the last phases it does something that's called going pitbull. And what that means is that the missile has switched on to terminal active radar homing, which means it no longer requires information from the plane. It can go on its own with its own radar, onboard radar, and hit the target by itself. Okay, from my understanding, the Amraam is one of those missiles that would like guidance from the plane as it gets closer to the target, but even if that plane is destroyed or loses lock, the missile has an onboard like history or memory, if you will, where it can continue on the target by itself. So it's kind of hard to classify the Amraam in terms of Fox 1 or Fox 2, Fox 3. As far as I know, it's classified as a Fox 3, okay, because it has the capability to go without the plane. Okay, so it's a Fox 3 as far as I'm concerned. And I believe the military also calls it a Fox 3. So that is the AIM-120 AMRAAM. Okay, so next we got the R-73 NATO designation AA-11 Archer. That's what this ND stands for, NATO designation. Basically, this is the Russian equivalent of a Sidewinder. Okay, it's used by Russia and any other Russian-affiliated countries. Basically, just like the Sidewinder, it's very well spread out across the world. The warhead is a 7.4 or 16-pound high explosive fragmentation round. I believe it's a high explosive fragmentation. It was a little hard to find what kind of information on what kind of warhead it was using. It may be using a rod system like the Sidewinder, but I don't think so. It could just be like shrapnel being fired into other planes. The detonation mechanism, again, unknown. More than likely, it's an IR proximity fuse. So again, it's using a heat signature, getting close enough to that heat signature and then exploding. The operational range, the Sidewinder, I believe, was 35 kilometers. The operational range here is 30 to 40 kilometers. It's 30 kilometers for the R-73, and then they made a more updated version, the R-74, which could get up to 40 kilometers. But again, if you're firing at 40 kilometers or 30 kilometers, you're asking a lot from the missile. You would definitely be firing at shorter ranges than that in order to increase your probability of kill. The speed, just like the Sidewinder, it's hitting Mach 2.5. As we said, these short-range missiles are generally a little slower. Guidance system, it's using a all-aspect infrared homing. All-aspect basically means it can see in almost every direction, like 180 degrees. Whether it can maneuver into those positions depends on the angle at which it's fired and all that, and how fast the other plane's going. I don't want to get too detailed into that. But basically, it's got an infrared homing, so it's got a seeker in the tip here, right here in the tip, where it's basically looking for heat signatures. Okay, so because it is an all-aspect infrared homing, it's fired as a designation Fox 2. Okay, that is the R-73 AA-11 Archer. Next, we have the R-27 NATO designation AA-10 Alamo. Once again, it's used by Russia and all Russian-affiliated countries. Warhead of 39 kilograms or 86 pounds. Detonation mechanism, radar proximity, and impact fuses. So this is one of those missiles that comes with an impact fuse. So if it hits a target, it will detonate, and the radar proximity fuse also allows it to use radar to see when it's close enough to a target to explode. Okay. Operational range 80 to 130 kilometers based on what variant you're using. Speed Mach 4.5. It's a longer range missile, as you saw from the 80 kilometers to 130. So these tend to go a little faster, right? The R-73 and the Sidewinder was a little slower at 2.5. This one's at Mach 4.5. Guidance system, this one's interesting. The Russians like to make different variants of the same missile using different guidance systems. So depending on the variant that you're using of the R-27, it can be a semi-active radar homing, which requires information from the plane all the way to the target, designated Fox 1. Or if you're using the R-27 EA variant, it's actually an active radar homing designated Fox 3 because it comes with its own onboard radar system. So with these Russian missiles, you gotta be careful with what kind of variant you're using. You need to know what kind of variant it is, and the guidance system is definitely important for you as a pilot. Because if you don't know, if you got an R-27 and you think that you have the R-27 active radar homing, you fire the missile and then you break your lock, but in reality you have a semi-active radar, the A or C variant of the missile, your missile is not going to track. It's not going to hit its target because you didn't know what kind of guidance system you needed. Okay, so you got to be careful with the Russian variants. As I said, they like to build many different variants using different guidance systems. So that basically sums up the A-10 Alamo. Okay, and now we have the R-77 NATO designation AA-12 Adder. It's used by Russia and all Russian affiliated countries. Warhead of 22.5 kilogram high explosive fragmentation. Detonation mechanism, laser proximity fuse. So this missile is using a laser to tell if it's close enough in order to explode. Operational range of 80 to 110 kilometers, once again based on what variant you're using. Because it's a longer range missile, you're getting higher speeds of Mach 4. Guidance system, it's using terminal active radar homing or infrared homing. Now, the terminal active radar homing, as we talked about, is much like the AIM-120 Amraam, and also somewhat like the Phoenix. Okay, so this missile is using radar information from the aircraft in order to get close enough to its target, and then within a certain range, it's switching onto terminal active radar homing. So it's using its own radar information to hit the target after a certain point. So just like the Amraam, it's technically going PIPL after a certain point. So this missile is Fox 1 all the way up until it goes PIPL, and at which point it becomes technically Fox 3. And for that reason, it's just called a Fox 3. Okay, it's designated Fox 3 because it has that ability. Now, because we talked about the Russians like to build different variants with different guidance systems, this missile apparently also comes in an infrared homing variant. Okay, and R-77T is what that variant is called, and it's using heat signatures to hit its target. So if you were firing the R-77T, you would be calling Fox 2, okay, as it is an infrared homing missile. So now that we've seen all of those missiles, we can go over these Fox codes again, and they might make a little bit more sense at this point. Fox 1 was semi-active radar homing, so any missile that requires information from the plane all the way to the impact point. Okay, so as we saw, the AIM-7 was a good example of this. The AIM-7 requires target lock all the way to the target, okay, from your plane. A Fox 2 was infrared homing, so anything that's really using a heat signature to hit its target. The Sidewinder or the R-73, the Russian variant of the Sidewinder, these are infrared homing, designated Fox 2. Okay. Fox 3 was active radar homing, so any missile that comes with its own onboard radar that technically does not require the plane to hit its target. So if the plane, it's preferred that the plane maintain lock, but if the plane loses lock, that missile can take over and it's fine. Okay. These missiles tend to go PIPL after a certain range, and even if the plane still has lock, they break that lock and use their own radar to hit the target in the final terminal phase of the impact. These missiles are designated Fox 3. And as we talked about, this rifle, I didn't do a Maverick because this is not an air-to-ground tutorial, but the Maverick is an air-to-ground missile and therefore would be designated rifle. Okay. And finally, we will review the graphics for anyone who's a visual learner. Semi-active radar homing Fox 1 requires information from the plane all the way to the target. Okay. This is the plane's radar locking onto the target, sending information to the missile to hit its target. Semi-active. Okay, the missile is semi-active. It requires information from the plane to hit the target, designated Fox 1. Infrared homing, designated Fox 2, is using the heat signature in order to hit the target. These missiles are generally shorter ranges. Sidewinders, R-73s, are infrared homing. Sorry, for the semi-active, I forgot to give an example. The Fox 1 is AIM-7. So an AIM-7 is a semi-active radar homing designated Fox 1. Infrared homing heat seekers designated Fox 2, like the Sidewinder and the R-73. Active radar homing designated Fox 3. They have their own onboard radar and technically do not require the plane, although they do in some variants prefer the plane to have lock all the way, at least to the terminal phase. These missiles have their own onboard radar, and an example of that would be like the AIM-120 Amraam, okay, designated Fox 3. Alright guys, so that is the tutorial. I hope that it was helpful for you in finding out what kind of missile designation, Fox 2, Fox 3, that kind of stuff when you're firing your missiles. And based on this information, if there's ever another missile or something I didn't cover, of which I didn't, there were a lot of missiles out there that I didn't cover, and the Russians have different variants. So based on this information, you should be able to go look up the missile that you're looking at, find out if it's a semi-active or an active or an infrared homing, and you would know what kind of guidance system it's using and what Fox designation it has. Okay? So I hope you found this helpful, and I'll see you next time.